Masechet Kiddushin Daf Peh. On Amud Bet, we're going to see the Mishnah about the laws of Yichud. But now we come to a very interesting and important Mishnah. Mishi asahu v'ishto lemedinat hayam, ubahu v'ishto ubana ve'amar ishaya sheyasat imi lemedinat hayam, harehi zo ve'elu baneha en srichim navi raya lo al ha'isha ve'lo al ha'banim. We're talking about, will someone have to prove that his kids are his own? Generally, we don't, right? If someone comes and we establish that the parents are, we know who the parents are, and we establish their lineage, and the marriage is proper and all that. And they say, here, these are our kids, and here's my son. He's going to get married. So we assume that this is their son or this is their daughter. They grew up together, so you generally don't have to bring a proof, some kind of biological proof that your kids are actually your kids. So now we deal with this in a case where someone goes away on a trip and comes back. We have 4 different cases. The first one, a person goes on a trip, he with his wife, and they go away for however long, maybe a few years, and then he comes back, he with his wife and his children. He had children while he was there. And he comes and says, this is the wife that I left with to overseas, and this is her, I came back with her, and these are her children. So therefore, their lineage, assuming we checked out the wife before they left, when they got married, and we established what her lineage is, so then we can assume that these are her children, and so this is their children, and we don't have to check the lineage. So in such a case, she does not have to bring any proof, not regarding the woman and not regarding the children. Not regarding the woman because it's the very same woman that was married here, so we could recognize her. Okay, this is the same wife. And not with the children either, because we assume it's the same children. Why do we assume that these are in fact her kids? Maybe they're just some random kids that they picked up along the way, or someone else's children. Gemara will explain, because the kids are clinging to their mother, and so we assume that that's theirs. It's kind of like today, if you travel domestic with kids, you don't have to prove, you don't need any identification for the kids. You say, this is my kids, and they let them on the plane. They don't have to check the names or that they're your kids. That's assuming that the kids are nice and quiet and going along with you. If the kids are yelling and saying, "Why stop kidnapping me? I want my real mom," then probably the TSA guards will bring you into questioning and then you'd have to figure out some proof of why your kids are saying this. Are they actually your kids? So that's the same thing here. The family comes back and the kids are clinging to their mom, which is as usual. Then we assume that is in fact the mom, and so the father does not have to bring any proof regarding any of them. Second case, meta ve'elu baneha mebi re'aya al habanim ve'eno mebi re'aya al ha'isha. A guy goes overseas and he comes back and says, listen, my wife died while overseas, but these are her sons. So then he has to bring proof regarding the children, that they are in fact children of that mother. He brings some kind of proof for that, but he doesn't have to bring proof about her, because we know her lineage from before they left. So we know who the mother is, and as long as you establish that these are the kids, so the kids will have that lineage. Third case, Isha nasati minatayam harehi zo ve'elu baneha v'raya l'isha ve'en tzarich laviraya ala banim. Now it's going to be the inverse. A guy goes away and he's single. And while he's overseas, he gets married, so he comes back with a wife and children. And he says, I got married overseas, this is my wife, and these are her kids. In that case, he has to prove, regarding his wife, he has to prove her lineage, right? What is she? Is she Jewish, not Jewish, mamzer, halala, can she marry a Kohen? Whatever, with all the things that you'd have to prove. If he's a Kohen, then he has to prove that she is marriageable to a Kohen. And once you prove her status, then you don't have to say anything about the kids, because the kids are clinging to her. So then you can assume that these are in fact her kids. If he comes back and he says, I married overseas and she died, but these are her children. So now he went single, and then he comes back and with just kids, and he says, well, this is from a wife that I married over there, but you don't know her. So then he has to bring proof for everything, since they don't know who this wife is, because she didn't live around here. So he has to bring proof regarding who the wife was and her lineage. And also, there's no clinging proof, because it just has a bunch of kids here. And so we don't know if these kids were from this woman that he's talking about, so he has to bring proof for that as well. All right, that's the Mishnah. Rav Huna says, when do we say that you don't have to bring proof that the kids are really theirs, that this mother is the mother of these children, only if they're clinging to her. But if they're yelling and screaming and trying to run away and saying, I want my real mom, then there's obviously something wrong. Okay, Teno Rabbanan, Isha Nasati b'Medinat Hayam, Mevi Ra'aya la'Isha ve'en tzarich lavi Ra'aya la'Banim, u'Mevi Ra'aya la'Gedolim ve'en tzarich lavi Ra'aya la'Ketanim. We have a Braita that's going to expand on the Mishnah, in the third case of the Mishnah, where he comes home and he says, listen, I have this wife I married overseas, and here's the kids. So then he has to bring proof regarding the wife, what's her lineage, but the kids are clinging to her, so he doesn't have to bring any proof that these are her kids. He has to bring a proof. Or, however, now that we know already, this the Baraita is adding, but he does have to bring a proof regarding the adult children, but not about the little children. This reason for clinging, that works for the little children. They're clinging after their mom, that's fine. But now there's some bigger children there that are adults, so that they need their own proofs. However, when is this true that you don't need proofs that the minor children are born from this mother? Only when there's only one wife. But if there were two wives, then you would have to bring a proof for the wives and for the children, both adults and minors. Rashi says this is talking about a case where he comes back. He says, I had two wives, and I had children from both of them back in the other country. One died, and so now he's coming with only one wife. Rambam says he actually shows up with two wives there. This might reflect the difference between Rashi, who was living in Ashkenaz, where they did not allow polygamy. So that would be, we had one wife, maybe she died or divorced, and then he married another one after. And Rambam is talking about a case where, he has two wives, and he shows up with two wives. Okay, so in this case, because we have these, there's one woman there, we'll follow Rashi, and there's kids there, but some of the kids are hers, some are not. The fact that they're clinging to her isn't because she's the real mom. It could be that this is the stepmom, but they still love the stepmom. She brought them up. So he says, listen, there's two wives, so we don't know which one's which. And so we need proof about who is the mother, what's her mother's lineage of each of the women, and we need proof about which kids are the children of this one and that one. Amar Resh Lakish, lo shenu ela bekodshe hagevul, ava b'yochasin lo. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu b'yochasin. Resh Lakish says that when you the fact that the kids are attached in the cases above, in the Mishnah, where we say we don't need proof, that the clinging of the kids is enough proof, Resh Lakish says that's only enough proof regarding kodashim that you can eat outside of Israel. That's referring to terumah, which is only to Rabbanan outside of Israel. That's the clinging proof is only good enough for the fact that these kids will be able to eat terumah. Let's say if the father is a kohen and she is someone who is fit to marry a kohen, so therefore the kids can eat terumah. That's enough. But for yochasin, when those kids want to come and get married, and we're going to have to decide if they're going to marry a kohen or whoever they're going to marry, we need to make sure that the lineage is proper. Then we will need proof. Or eventually, we're going to need more and better proof. This clinging thing is only good enough for terumah. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even for yochasin, you have a family, they come, the kids are clinging to their mom. You assume that's them, and even for marriage purposes, you can assume if the parents are good, then the children are also good. Rabbi Yochanan is consistent with something else he said. Amar Rabbi Haya bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Malkin al Chazakot v'Chazakot Sulkin v'Sorfin al Chazakot v'en Sorfin Truma al Chazakot. Rabbi Yochanan says that we'll give someone lashes based on a chazakah. This over here is a chazakah. Usually, if the kids are clinging to their mother, then they are the children, the biological children of the mother. And based on that, we would give someone lashes. Again, I will give examples. Or we can give sikila or serefa, stoning or burning punishments based on a presumption. However, regarding teruma that becomes tameh, you can't eat it. The kohen can't eat it. But all you could do is burn it. You can benefit from the burning. You can burn it for light or for heat. But you can't get any other, you can't eat it. But you can only burn teruma if it's tameh. If it's tahor, you're not allowed to burn it, then you have to eat it. So if we have a chazakah regarding some teruma over here that it's tameh, but chazakah is not good enough, so we won't eat it, but we're not going to be able to burn it either, because only chazakah. You need better proof that it is tameh in order to burn it. We'll have to just leave it in limbo. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yochanan. Chazakah works for these punishments, but it's not sufficient for burning teruma. Now let's explain. Malkina chazakot kerav Yudah, damar Rav Yudah, huchseka nida b'shchenoteha, ba'ala lokeh aleha mishum nida. When would we give someone lashes based on a chazakah? As Rav Yudah said, let's say a certain woman is known to be a nidah at this time period by her neighbors. The neighbors, they all talk to each other and watch each other and what they do and how they dress. And so the neighbors know that this woman was nidah during this time period. And there's witnesses that the husband slept with her during that time. The punishment for sleeping with a nidah is malkut. So even though it's only a chazakah, we don't have proof that she was nidah at this time, but based on the chazakah of the neighbors, she will get malkut. So that's the first case. So kim v'sorfin al chazakot kederabba bar Rav Huna damar Rabba bar Rav Huna ish ve'isha tinok ve'tinoket sheigdilu betoch habayit nizkalin ze al ze v'nisrafin ze al ze. In the case of sikila and serefa, based on a chazakah, is what Rabba bar Rav Huna says. Let's say you have a man and a woman, a boy and a girl, who all grow up in a house together. So the assumption is that this is a family, and that these children are the son and daughter of this woman. And it could be that the father is also their father, or not, or it could be that it was her children from a previous marriage. Doesn't matter. And then we have testimony that the mother had relations with the boy. So then there's a chazakah that they are related. And if they're related, then that's incest, and that relationship deserves stoning. And so you would stone, even though there's no proof that this son is in fact the biological child of the mother. But the fact is that they grew up together as a family. That's a chazakah, and based on that assumption, is strong enough to give them sikila. Or if the father was with this girl, then even if he was not the father, even if it's just his wife's daughter, that is sufficient to make that also irva, and the punishment for that would be serefa. And so again here, even though there's no proof that this daughter is the biological daughter of the woman in the house, but we assume that it is so because they grew up together, and so this is going to be, even if it's not the father, it's still his wife's daughter, and that requires serefa. That's the chazakah for those punishments. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Mishum bar kapara Maaseh b'isha shebat Yerushalayim v'tinok murkav la al ketefa v'higdilato uba'aleha vehebi'um lebeit din uskalum lo mipnei shebena vadai elo mipnei shekaruch achareha. And we have an actual case, quite amazing, a case of actual capital punishment of a woman that came to Yerushalayim, and she had a child riding on her shoulders, and she brought him up, and then they one time had relations, and so they came to Bet Din, and the Bet Din gave them stoned them, not because we know for sure that this was the child. There was no proof, but because he clung to her. That's sufficient proof that this is her biological child, and so they did in fact stone them. Again, we don't have stoning is not very often. Once every 70 years would be a cruel court, but okay, once in 70 years, this is the case where such capital punishment might have been given. Ve'en sorfin teruma ala chazakot. Tamar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish sorfin ala chazakot. Rabbi Yochanan amar en sorfin. The last statement of Rabbi Yochanan is that we're not going to burn teruma only based on the chazakah that is tameh. We need proof that is tameh. This itself is subject to a machloket. Tamar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Resh Lakish says we do burn tiruma, even just based on a chazakah. And Yochanan says, no, we don't. V'azdula ta'amayu, and they are consistent with what they say elsewhere. Ditnan, tinok shenimsa besad ha'isa basek biyado. Rabbi Meir mitaher chamim mitamein, mipnei shedarko shel tinok letapeach. You have a small child, a baby or a toddler, that is next to a piece of dough. And this toddler also has some dough in its hand. So the assumption is that toddlers touch all kinds of things. They go outside, they play with dead mice and rats and lizards. That's what they like to do. That's, in the olden days, they would go play with those things. They didn't have so many toys in the house. So the assumption is that toddlers are tameh. They're always touching all kinds of things. And so now he has a piece of dough in his hands, and there's a piece of dough on the table. So is the dough in his hands from that? And that would mean he touched the dough on the table and made it tameh. Do we assume it is or not? Is a machloket in this Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says the dough on the table is tahor. Oh, so what? There's a baby nearby and with dough in his hands. We don't know for sure. Hachamim say it's tameh because it's the way of kids to handle things. Kids are always touching, poking, taking, and since that's the usual thing that kids do, we can assume the dough in his hands is from the dough on the table that he touched, and the kid is most likely tameh. Now, we analyze this Mishnah. My tameh de Rabbi Meir. It's always interesting when we have an analysis of a Mishnah in Masechet Teharot, because there is no Talmud, not Bavli and not Yerushalmi, on Masechet Teharot. So did the rabbis learn Teharot? The answer is yes. Even though it's true, there's no Talmud. There never was a Talmud. It's not that there used to be and we lost it. There never was a Talmud, a full Talmud composed on Teharot. But you see from here that the rabbis did study it, and their discussions are quoted elsewhere, like here. Okay, so when we studied that Mishnah, we asked, what is the reason for Rabbi Meir for saying that the dough is tahor? Kasaba rov tinokot metapechin u'miut emetapechin. V'isa b'cheskat tahora medet. Usmoch miuta lachazaka itra lerubam. So Rabbi Meir says, majority of toddlers touch things, but there's a minority that keep their hands to themselves. They're properly trained and well behaved. Now, the dough itself has a chazakah that is tahor, right? The adults who made it, they made sure that it would be tahor and left it there, and the adults, the adults know it was tahor from before, so there's a chazakah that is tahor. So you need something to ruin that chazakah. So we'll take the mi'ut and the chazakah together. Since there's a minority of kids that keep their hands to themselves, and there is a chazakah, so we'll join those two together, and that will be stronger than the majority of kids that touch things. So even though if we had just a majority and a minority, we would follow the majority, but the fact here is that we have a chazakah of tahara that joins together with the minority, that makes the minority even stronger than the majority. And therefore, we can assume that the chazakah remains in its place, and the fact that this kid got the dough, he got the dough from somewhere else. Someone gave him a piece of dough. And this is the type of kid who keeps his hands to himself. And Rabbanan say a minority, kids that keep their hands to themselves, that's such a minority, we ignore it. And instead, we have a majority of kids that touch things, and versus a chazakah that the dough was tahor before, so it should continue to be tahor. But when you have a majority versus a presumption, the majority wins, and we assume that the kid came and touched the dough and made it tameh. Okay, that was the discussion of that Mishnah. Now, where do we see that azdu l'ta'amayhu? Amar Resh Lakish mishum Rabbi Oshaya zo hi shesorfin aleha et teruma. Rabbi Yochanan amar en zo chazaka shesorfin aleha teruma. Resh Lakish said, this example right here, the opinion of Rabbanan, that we assume, right? Rabbanan said that we assume that the kid touched it and therefore it's tameh. So this is exactly the case of something. If this is hala, like teruma, has to be in betahora, and if not, you have to burn it. So Resh Lakish says this is a case that you would burn teruma. In let's say the same situation where you had some teruma that was tahor, and then the kid is nearby and he has some of the same type of produce in his hand, and we assume that the kid touched it, and therefore that assumption based on the Rav is so strong that you would even burn it. That's a shakish. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, this is not called a presumption that we would burn upon it. In other words, in this case, it's we're not sure. We have to set it aside. It could be that the kid touched it, and it would be tameh, but maybe the kid didn't touch it, and has a chazakah that it was tahor, and maybe it's a type of kid that doesn't touch things. It could be this way, it could be that way. So you know what? You have to leave it aside. You can't eat it, and you can't burn it. So that's the example of Resh Lakish that says we do not follow a presumption in order to burn teruma. Ela ezo chazaka l'Rabbi Yochanan shesurfin aleha et teruma. So rather, what would be a case? Rabbi Yochanan does agree that there are some cases where we can burn teruma based on a chazaka, although not that case, because that case is too wishy-washy. But there's a more a stronger case. Kiditnan, even though it says ditnan, this is actually a braita. Isa betoch habayit ushrasimu sfardaim etapelin sham v'nimsu chatichot ba'isa im rov shirashim teme'a im rov sefardaim tehora. Let's say you have a piece of dough in the house, and in the house is all kinds of creepy crawly things. Creepy crawlies are these things, lizards and a skink and a gecko and a chameleon. These are some of the 8 shirasim. If they are dead, then they cause a high level of impurity. So in the house, you have lots of lizards and chameleons all around, and there are also frogs in the house. Frogs are not one of the shirasim. A dead frog, as gross as that might be, does not cause tum'ah. Okay, so you have, so they're all over the place, and now in the dough we find some pieces of some legs of things that we don't know. It's not a whole thing, so we don't know if this is a frog leg or a piece of a lizard or whatever. It's in the dough. Okay, this is very gross. I don't think we would eat the dough. But anyway, the question is it tahor or tameh? So we look. If most of the creeping things around the house are one of the 8 shirasim, then you have to assume that the limbs in the dough are from shirasim and is tameh. But if the majority of the things in the house are hopping around and they are frogs, then we assume that the pieces in the dough are frog legs and the dough is tahor. So here you see that this is a case where Rabbi Yochanan would say we would follow the majority. And so this is a stronger majority than the other one, because it's right here. You can actually, kids most kids do this. One kid doesn't do that. That's harder to quantify. Here you can actually go around and look around and see how many frogs there are, how many shirasim there are in the house. So here, if it's a majority shirasim, then even though it's not 100% sure, but this is sufficient of an assumption that you could take this dough and you can burn it if it's teruma. Tanya kevated Rabbi Yochanan, shene devarim en bahem da'at lishael, v'asum chachamim kema sheyesh bahem da'at lishael, tinok ve'od acheret. We have a baraita that supports Rabbi Yochanan. It says there are 2 items that you can't ask it any question, but we make it as if you ask it a question. This relates to a general law that if something is in a safek, in a private domain, but it relates to a person who can talk, then you ask the person, you were here. Did you touch this? Did you not touch this? So then, depending on what their answer is, you could decide if it's tameh or tahor. And if he's not sure, then you have to presume in a private domain that it's tameh. However, if it's something that's inanimate and you can't ask, then even in private domain, you can assume that's tahor. However, an exception to this rule, there are two things that even though you can't ask them questions, nevertheless, we make it as if it's like a person that you can ask a question to. And therefore, we presume, when it's safek, we presume that it's tameh. And what are the two things? A case of tinok and another case. The case of a tinok had amaran. That's the case that we talked about of the kid holding a piece of dough, and where you can't, even though it's a toddler, so the kid can't talk. You ask him, where'd you get this dough from, and he just says blah blah something. So since we can't, even though we can't ask him, but we don't consider it like an inanimate object, we consider it like a person who can talk but doesn't know, and therefore we leave it in safek, and that is what Rabbi Yochanan said. So that Braita supports Rabbi Yochanan. The Braita also said that there's another case. What's the other case? Oh, Isa betoch habayit v'tanagolim mashkin temein sham. This is yet another one of, you have some dough, and it's in the house, and there are chickens and nearby, and there's also impure liquid that's also all there. All that is in the house. Ve'nimseu nikurin ba'isa tolin lo ochlin velo sorfin, and we see little holes in the dough like chickens pecked in it. So then we have to worry that maybe the chickens went and they touched the impure liquid, and then they went and they pecked in the dough and transferred the tumah to the dough as well, by transferring the liquid onto it. So, but we're not sure if they did or not. So in that case, also we have to just leave it on the side. You can't eat it because maybe it's tameh, but you can burn it because maybe it's tahor. And it's teruma. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, lo shanu elu b'mashkim levanim, ava mashkim adumim, mita denakir meda yediyah. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi qualifies this braita and says that's only true that you don't know what it is and you have to leave it there if it's clear liquid, white meaning clear. But if it's red liquid or something that would be noticeable, well then, if the chickens went and took that liquid and pecked in the dough, then you would see it, right? You would see, because it would be colored red. And so therefore, if it's not colored red, then you can assume that it's tahor and you could eat it. So you wouldn't have to leave it in limbo. Hold on. Well, but maybe the dough absorbed the liquid, right? It did. Maybe even if it was red, it went and it pecked it, and then the red color went in and was absorbed, and that's why you can't see it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, davar se shama berebi uperusho lo shama. Rabbi Yochanan says that this tradition that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, that's berebi, the distinguished one, that he said that he reported, he reported a tradition that there's a qualification on that beraita between two types of liquids. However, its exact interpretation he did not hear, and so therefore did not transmit. But this is a clarified version of what he said. לא שנו אלא במשקים סלולים שבבוא אשר תינוק ניכר בה. אבל משקים אחורין לא. It's not the difference between white and red, because both of those might get absorbed by the dough and then you wouldn't know. But rather, so therefore it would be a problem no matter what. So that would not be a qualification. Whether it was white or red, you'd still have a problem and wouldn't be able to burn it. Rather, the correct interpretation is as follows. When the Braita say that we don't know if it touched it or not, or if the liquids are on it or not, and therefore you have to leave it in limbo, that's only if it was a clear liquid such that you can see a reflection of a child in it. So then that kind of clear liquid, even if it was there, it might have gotten absorbed. So we don't know if it got absorbed in its tameh, or if the chickens never transferred the liquid in its tahor. That's when you have to leave it in limbo. But if the liquid is murky, that it's all like thick and dirty, then if the chickens put this murky liquid on the dough, then it would leave a mark. It would leave a stain. It wouldn't all get absorbed. So it's not as sufficient that it be white or red. Even something red might get absorbed, but something murky and thick, would not get totally absorbed. And so if it's a murky liquid and we don't see any sign of the murky liquid on the dough, then we can assume that the chicken just picked it but didn't transfer any liquid from it. And in that case, the dough would be for sure tahor. The next Mishnah teaches, Lo yitached adam im shete nashim, aval isha achat mityachedet im shete anashim. One man is not allowed to be secluded with two women, but one woman is permitted to be secluded with two men. The Gemara will explain the difference. Rabbi Shimon omer, af ish echad mityached im shete nashim, bizman sheishto imo, veyashin imahen bepundiki, mipnei sheishto mishamarto. Rabbi Shimon says, a man can be secluded with two women as long as his wife is there, or is one of them, or is with them, and they can even sleep together in the same inn as long as he is there. A man and his wife are there, and there's another woman there, because his wife will protect him. His wife will make sure make sure that nothing happens between her husband and that other woman. But if it's not his wife, if it's just two women, then the one woman will not necessarily stop any sin from happening between the other woman and the man. מתייחד אדם עם אמו ועם ביתו וישן עמהם בקירוב בשר ואם הגדילו זו ישנה בכסותה וזה ישן בכסותו. A person can be secluded with his mother or his daughter and even sleep next to them without clothes on. Generally, in the olden days, most people slept without clothes on, not as common today. So the point is here that a father can sleep in the same bed as his daughter, or a mother in the same bed as her son. But that's only if they are small, if they're children, if they're minors. But if they grew up, then they have to be clothed. They can sleep in the same bed, but only if they have clothing on. All right, that is the Mishnah. My ta'ama, what is the reason for the Mishnah in the beginning to make a distinction between one man and two women and two men and one woman? Tana de Belial ho'il v'nashim datan kalot alehen, because it says in a baraita from the school of Eliyahu that women are light of mind, meaning easily seduced or convinced of something. This phrase actually comes right out of Greek sources, say exactly the same thing, that they're light of mind and can be easily convinced. Therefore, if you have two men and one woman, and one of the men and the woman think of starting to fool around, the other man will stop them and say, hey, you're not allowed to do that, stop that. And so we can be sure that one man will stop them or report them if they did that. But if there's two women and one man, then the one man might convince the other one, hey, just don't say anything, it's okay, and he may sin and be able to seduce or convince the other woman, and she won't stop them. So that's why that would be a problem of yichud, whereas two men would not be a problem of yichud. What is the source of this prohibition? The context of this pasuk has nothing to do with arayot or anything like that subject, but rather with idolatry. It says in the pasuk, "Yisitecha achicha ben imecha, o bincha o bitecha o eshet achekecha, o recha k'shnavsecha baseter lemor, nenecha v'nabda Elohim acharim asher lo yadata ata v'avotecha." If it says your brother, the son of your mother, meaning your half-brother, maternal, from the maternal side, or these other relationships, if they should come and seduce you in secret and say, come, let's go do avodah zarah, right? Don't listen to them. All right, so the secret here, baseter, is related to being in hiding together, being secluded together, and saying something about there's a distinction between a maternal brother and a paternal brother. So that now we're going to ask, V'chi ben em mesit ben av eno mesit? Is it only possible that a maternal half-brother would convince someone else to do idolatry, but a paternal half-brother would not? Why make a distinction? Elo lomar lecha ben mityached im imo ve'asur lityached im kol arayot shebatorah. So it must be that saying this because this is something that will happen when they are together, someone that's very close to you. It wants to say that even if someone very close to you says, hey, come do idolatry, someone that you would normally trust, if they say do idolatry, don't trust them, don't listen to them. So now, who is someone that's very close? Well, that would be two maternal brothers. Why are they close together? Because they live together with their mother. And so you see from here that a child is permitted, a child's son is permitted to be secluded with their mother. And the brothers, if there's more than one, the brothers will be secluded with their mother, and that is permitted. And that's what makes them so close. And that's why the Torah says, this is, even your brother that you grew up with and you slept with, in the same bed, and they're together and secluded with your mother, then you make sure not to follow him. So you see here that it's permitted for a child, to be secluded with his mother. So from that, since it has to go out of its way to say that this is permitted for a son and a mother to be together, so we see that otherwise they're not permitted to be secluded together. So we see that this is an exception to the rule. From the exception, we can learn the rule that generally a man and a woman are not allowed to be secluded together. Okay, and that would be true for anyone who's prohibited from each other. A mother and a daughter, a mother and a son obviously are prohibited from each other, but they don't have attraction to each other, so therefore there's no prohibition for them to be secluded. But anyone else who are prohibited to each other are not allowed to be secluded together. So that's the source. It's not exactly an explicit source. Most Rishonim consider yichud to be deoraita because it does quote it from pasuk. Rambam, as is his way, says just because you derive from pasuk doesn't mean it's deoraita. Could just be that this is an asmachta. So Rambam considers yichud to be a dirabanan law. Now pishateh dikra b'may ketiv. Okay, the Gemara itself knows that this is not the contextual meaning of it. We just happen to learn roundabout, since it says that this person is close, and that means that the mother and their sons can be together, and therefore other relationships cannot. But what's the contextual meaning of the pasuk? Mamad Abaye lo mibaya ka'amad, lo mibaya ben av desani le, ve'ayitz le aisot ra'ot, ela afilu ben em de la sani le, em asaiti le kamash malan. Okay, the reason in context that it talks about a maternal half-brother is because it's saying not only this, even that. I don't have to tell you that if you have a paternal half-brother, but they usually hate each other because paternal brothers are competing for the inheritance. So they're not going to trust each other. You're giving me advice. This is some kind of bad advice. You're trying to get rid of me. So a person is not going to listen to his paternal half, may not listen to his paternal half brother. And so there, you should make sure not to listen to him. But the Torah say, in addition to that, even a maternal half brother, where they don't hate each other because they have different fathers, so they're not rivals over inheritance. And so there you might think that, maybe I should listen to my maternal half-brother must love me, he must be giving me good advice. No, if the advice is about idolatry, do not listen. So that's why in context it talks about a maternal half-brother, but indirectly we learn that maternal half-brothers are close to each other, they live together, whereas paternal half-brothers do not live together, right? And that actually is another way to provide this proof that a son would not be able to live with his father and stepmother, because that would be yichud for a son to be with his stepmother in yichud, and that's why if there was such a situation of divorce and then the son would likely stay with the mother, because yichud is permitted there, but not with the stepmother, where yichud is not permitted. Okay, Ne'ema matintin de lo Abba Shaul. It seems that our Mishnah would disagree with the opinion of Abba Shaul. De Tanya, Kol Shloshim Yom Yoseh b'chek v'nikbar be'isha achat u'shnei anashim, aval lo be'ish echad u'shnei nashim. Abba Shaul omer, af be'ish echad u'shnei nashim. Braita is talking about if a child dies within 30 days. So we don't have a big whole big funeral with a coffin and a lot of people coming and procession and rows of comforters. That's a general funeral, is going to have all that ceremony. But for a baby that's less than 30 days old, one goes without a coffin, but rather an adult will just hold the baby in their chest. And you don't have to go with a lot of people, but 3 people would be sufficient to give just a little bit of honor. And now with those 3 people that go out, you have to remember cemeteries in those days were far out from the city, so you'd have to walk for quite a bit, and you would be secluded. Secluded doesn't only mean in a room with a locked door. It means even if something is far away from the city where there's no one around. So to go out to the funeral procession, it's okay to have 1 woman and 2 men go. Maybe the mother is going to go, and then 2 other men to go and help out, do the digging, whatever. But not 1 man and 2 women should not go. And this is consistent with our Mishnah, that 1 man and 2 women, then that would be Yichud. Abba Shaul, however, says even 1 man and 2 women is okay. So it seems Abba Shaul is more lenient and permits 1 man and 2 women. That as long as it's not 1 and 1, that would be certainly prohibited according to everyone. 1 man and 1 woman who are prohibited to each other and not married would be prohibited. But otherwise, if it's 3 people, seems Abba Shaul says it's okay. So we say no, not necessarily. Afilu tema Abba Shaul bishat aninut tebir Yisreh. The Mishnah can be even according to Abba Shaul, and the time that when a person's in mourning, aninut is the period after a person dies and before the person is buried. There's called onen. So this is acute mourning. Person is very sad, thinking about this terrible tragedy that just happened to them, and so their inclination to sin is broken. So we don't worry about it. That's why Abba Shaul says in this particular case, where it doesn't say exactly who's going, but let's presume that maybe it's the father, or maybe it's the mother, or both, or well, if it's the father and the mother, then there'll be no problem because they're married. But rather, if let's say one of the people, let's say this guy is the father, and there's 2 other women there, we're not worried that he's going to sin because he is in mourning. And so that's why it's permitted. Rabbanan sabre la Rabbi Yitzchak tamar Rabbi Yitzchak ma'it onen adam chai geber al chata'av afilu b'shat aninuto shel adam yisro mitgaber alav. Rabbanan say even at a funeral, still you cannot. You have to keep the laws of yichud. That a person's yetzer hara is so strong it can even entice a person even when a person is in mourning. And he learns it from this pasuk ma'it onen adam chai. Literally, how can a person make a claim or complain a human for his sins, right? Meaning everybody's guilty, and so what complaint can a person have to think that they're innocent and they have nothing bad deserving coming to them? Okay, but Rabbi Yitzchak is reading as follows: Yit onem, which literally means to complain. He's saying as onen, right? So, what can an onen do? After all, even an onen has to overcome his sins, right? Even an onen cannot ignore the yetzer hara. Even at the time a person is onen, still his yetzer can overcome him, and therefore, even if a person is going and burying a dead relative, still he can't violate yichud. V'abasho ki ketibahu b'mitraim amidotav ketiv. Hachi kamar ma yitraim amidotav v'chi gabar al chataav tayo chayim shenatati lo. Abba Shaul says, no, I don't read this pasuk regarding that. Abba Shaul says when a person's in mourning, they're not gonna their spirit. Their yesed is broken. Rather, this pasuk is talking about someone who is complaining about God's ways, about God's justice. And then the pasuk tells that kind of person, what can one complain about God's ways? Where you think you were treated unjustly? Can you overpower your sins? Nobody can claim that they are perfect. Life I have given him is sufficient for him. He deserves no more. So a person has a life, say thank you for whatever he has. And then if suffering or death comes upon a person, what can a person say about it, right? Then no one can claim that they are perfect and don't deserve anything bad coming to him. So Abba Shaul reads it simply as a peshat, and therefore it does not learn anything about aninut. V'Rabbanan kehu ma'aseh dahi iteta dava obada ve'apikte. Rabbanan say not so. The Rabbanan point to an actual case of a certain woman. There was an incident, and she removed. It's not clear what the incident was. Apparently, something like she had a baby that died, or a relative that died, and brought out that dead person and went to the cemetery. Probably a baby, because then there was no one else there, and she was just her and some man. And sure enough, they sinned. So we see from an actual story that happened that even a person who was in mourning still sinned. And so in reality, we see that a person's yesed is still active even when they're sinning, and therefore even at a funeral, a person has to keep the laws of aninut, whereas Abba Shaul thought that at a funeral one can relax the laws of aninut. Aval isha achat, the Mishnah said that one woman can be secluded with two men, and because one of the men will make sure to stop and rebuke the other guy and not let him sin. Amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, lo shanu ela bekesherim, aval pepirutzim afilu be'asara namela. Rav says this is only if you have kosher, upstanding men who will make sure that the other guy is doing the right thing. But if you have promiscuous men, then even 10 people will not help, right? You have a whole group that they're all promiscuous, so no one's gonna stop each other. The opposite, they'll encourage each other. So then that will not help with yichud. Don't be around promiscuous people, and even in a big group. That's even worse. Hava ma'aseh v'osuha asara b'mita. Amar Rav Yosef teda demichabere be'asara v'ganbe kishura v'la michsefe mehadadeh. And in fact, there was a case where 10 people took a certain woman who was dead out. They presumed dead, and they took her out, and they all were in on it. They went out to the cemetery so that they could all sin. So even 10 people who have a bad plan can cooperate to do evil. And Rav Yosef says, look, another example where you can have, let's say people want to steal a heavy beam, and needs 10 people to carry the beam. So you get 10 thieves to join together, and no one stops each other to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this, is not a good thing. No, 10 evil people will join up together and all do a sin together. So that's true in stealing. It's true in arayot also. Make sure that you hang around people that are kisherim, that are trustworthy, that will set you on the right path, just in case you stumble. And only if you're around kisherim, then you can be alone, secluded with 2 men and 1 woman. It seems that we can provide a proof for this statement of Rav that the 2 men have to be kosher men. We can provide a proof from the laws of sotah. If a man declares his wife to be a sotah, then the next step in a local town, the next step is that the man and the woman have to go to the Sanhedrin in order to finish Bet HaMikdash, to finish off the ceremony. Now, once a man claims his wife is sotah, they're not allowed to have relations together, and so they can't be secluded together just in case. And therefore, the local Bet Din will provide 2 Talmidei Chachamim to accompany them on the way. So to make sure, just in case, the man and the woman are together on the way. That's what the Mishnah says. So we can derive from here, Talmidei Chachamim al ma'ala. Only Talmidei Chachamim we put with them, not just regular people. So isn't that a proof that the seclusion is allowed? They're going on the way. They might be going for far, and they have to stay in they might be on deserted roads, or might have to stay in a hotel or somewhere together. So you have to provide Talmidei Chachamim, meaning kosher people. That's when the laws of Yichud that's when it's permitted to be secluded with 1 woman here, and actually there's 3 guys, but they have to be Chachamim. If you just send regular people, then it won't help, because maybe those people are promiscuous people and won't stop the husband and wife from being together. So is that a good proof for Rav? And we say not necessarily. The reason why we send Talmidei Chachamim is not necessarily because they will make sure to stop them, but really to warn them that, listen, don't do this. Otherwise, if the husband is together with his wife while she's sotah, then the waters won't work. The sotah waters will not have an effect. Even if she's guilty, nothing will happen, because the sotah waters only work if he is innocent from all sin. If he sins by being with his wife after she's sotah, then it won't work. So you need Talmidei Chachamim that know the halacha, that can tell him this, and that will prevent him from being with his wife, because otherwise people are familiar with their spouses and may otherwise be together. So it's not necessarily a proof that you need two men, but still, Rav doesn't contradict the halacha either, and so Rav's law is a good idea, that it should be kosher men and not promiscuous men. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.